Welcome back to Great Life, Great Career. Here's your host, Scott Miller.
Welcome back, everyone. Having a great conversation with Todd Herman, the author of The Alter Ego Effect. This book is phenomenal. The Power of Secret Identities to Transform Your Life. Pick up this book by HarperCollins. I think some of the stories that Todd tells in here are so relatable. Todd, I want to take time for you to share the story about the colonel who pulled you aside at one of your keynote speeches at Fort Bragg, because it's inspiring, it's vulnerable, and it's very relatable to, I think, all of us. Walk us through that story, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So in the book, I talk about the power of the clothing that we wear. There's this psychological phenomenon called enclothed cognition, where basically we as human beings, we attach story and meaning to the clothing that other people wear and that we wear. And the moment that you actually put on that clothing, you enclose yourself in the natural cognitive traits of that item. So there is no group of people that does a better job of constantly telling the story of what it means to wear the Army uniform or the Navy uniform or the Marine uniform. What's the code and the credo of those of us that wear, and they're just constantly reinforcing that. So here is this Army colonel. He just heard me talk about the power of using these alter egos to help you perform at your absolute peak consistently. And he pulled me aside and he said, listen, I love your talk. And it made so much sense, especially because of the fact that we do attach so much meaning to this uniform and what it means. But I go home after spending 10, 12 hours mentoring, coaching, and, leading these young men to shape them into powerful leaders in our units. And I walk through the door and I don't turn that off. I'm sort of lording over my young kids and I'm treating them like they're young soldiers. And that's not how I want to be treated, because even from my own past, my father did that to me and it wasn't a great experience growing up. And I see myself making that same mistake. And I just said, listen, I completely understand. Just think about it. Like you're flexing these behaviors all day long. I would be doing the same thing. I'm a challenging type coach and leader as well. But when I go home, I shed that identity at the door, and I'm very intentional about how I want to walk through that door and now onto that new stage, which is to be a dad to my 3 little kids. And so I said, the one thing that you've done is you go home and you don't keep your uniform on, do you? He's like, no, I change into, just my regular home clothes. And I said, yeah, but have you attached a meaning and a story to those clothes that you put on? Is there a narrative around now what you're showing up as with that shirt that you put on? So I said, I encourage you to think about having a uniform at home that you put on, and that's what you wear. Now, what are those traits that you're going to be activating to be a phenomenal father and leader to your kids? You're a challenger all day with the unit that you lead, but now do you want to activate a more gentle side of yourself when you show up at home? And that's what this is all about, is just really trying to, in the book, I'm just trying to unpack with people and show that we do have many selves. We have one human body, but we have many selves and we have many roles that we play. And using this idea can be an extraordinarily powerful way to truly not only be a high performer in one area of your life, but in multiple areas of your life.
Todd, you're suggesting kind of literally that when I walk in the front door, I take off my cufflinks and my dress shoes and go put on some tennis shoes and sweatpants and get into dad mode to my 3 young kids.
Absolutely. Think of it like we all have these phone booth moments in our day, right? Like, we understand that when Clark Kent jumps into the phone booth to become Superman so that he can now go and succeed on a new field of play. But he was using Clark Kent as a useful, identity to help him move around society unnoticed. Well, we have many of these phone booth moments, which are basically us activating a new role that we step into. And just most people aren't very intentional with the way that they lead their lives. And then some people might be so challenged by how they feel their own identity is that an alter ego can be a powerful way for someone to discover a new side of themselves.
Todd, would you share the story about Beyonce? I thought it was a great story in the book of how she took on an alter ego, and then at some point, I think you wrote she left it behind. Can you kind of walk through that transformation she went through?
Yeah, great question, because it's a question that comes up when people go, is there a time when I don't need it anymore?
Right.
Like if I'm using this, and it's a great idea. And I'll actually, before I share the Sasha or the Beyonce and Sasha Fierce ideas, there's this great quote from Cary Grant, the Hollywood Golden Era actor, debonair, charismatic man, came from Bristol, England. He actually suffered with depression a lot of his life, but at the end of his career, he had this great line where he said, "I pretended to be somebody I wanted to be, and I became that person, or he became me, but at some point in time, we met." And so everyone now sees him as this charismatic, debonair person, but that's how he really wanted to show up in life. And the only thing I would change in that is, instead of saying I pretended to be, it's I activated somebody I wanted to be, because this honors the core idea that we are all creative expressions. Like, we can decide. You're not an oak tree forever, or you are not the definition of that maybe horrible thing that happened to you a long time ago. We can create a new self and shape, what we want to be. And so Beyonce is a good example. Beyonce grew up in a gospel singing family in Houston, Texas, at the front of the church singing gospel hymns every single Sunday. And her voice was legendary. People would come in just to see her almost. And now all of a sudden she's growing up and she's thrust into this opportunity to dance on stage with a troupe of 8 of them, where she's singing kind of provocative lyrics, maybe dancing more provocatively, something that would be very uncomfortable for her, and it was uncomfortable. So she created a stage persona called Sasha Fierce. And, she used Sasha Fierce to really explore this creative side. And then, famously, in I think it was 2009, she retired, quote unquote, retired Sasha Fierce, because she didn't need that persona anymore. Really what had happened was exactly like Cary Grant said. She became the performer that she wanted to be. And now she didn't need it as an activation tool to step into this, new performer.
You're listening to Great Life, Great Career. I'm your host, Scott Miller. Our guest today is Todd Herman, peak performance coach to Olympians and high-performance performers around the world, the author of the book Alter Ego. Todd, I'm sure you've been asked this question before. How do you square this sort of what seems at face value incongruence behind coaching people to take on a alternate performance or persona, if you will, a different identity, different ego, with just sort of knowing who they are, becoming comfortable with what they have and what they're about, and just leaning into themselves versus transferring their identity to someone else? What's your advice on the seeming incongruence on that?
Yeah, well, the incongruence is there's 2 things. I challenge people with this one paradigm that I would say has trapped a good chunk of society, which is this paradigm of the authentic self. There's no such thing as the authentic self, because there is no one self. Because, if I met you, had an interaction with you in business, and then I met you when you're around your kids, am I going to see possibly a different side of you?
Well,
Absolutely.
you will now, because I'll be in sweatpants.
But yeah, so then, should I now automatically think that, he wasn't being authentic with me when we interacted in business? No, of course, that didn't make any sense. And yet that's the idea of the authentic self argument has been thrust upon people. And an interesting thing, like, I've worked with some of the most wealthy people on the planet, some of the top athletes on the planet, entertainers, public figures, just entrepreneurs who are just starting out as well. And they have never, ever brought up the word authenticity or authentic self to me, ever. And so that should tell people that maybe there might be a paradigm that you should cut the strings on, because it's not something that people who are pursuing challenging things actually operate inside of. Now, to couch it a different way for people too is, think about yourself. Who you are today. If you're someone who pursues growth, which would be shocking for the people that would be listening to this if they didn't do that. But we're always expanding and growing, exploring, learning new things. And so your entire self is constantly expanding. That is a pursuit of authenticity, in my view. And, when we were kids, every single person listening to this has already used this concept, because we did it as kids very naturally. And that's when we were actually in our most, not authentic, when we were in our most tapped in part of our creative imagination, because we're operating in theta brainwave state when we are when we're between the ages of 0 to 7. Theta brainwave state is where zone and flow states sit. And that's what young children are constantly doing. And what are they doing? They're saying, how far could I jump off this sofa if I was Superman? Or Dad, and they wear capes and they do all these things. And yet we shirk that stuff nowadays because they think, that's just being childish. And yet, in the book, I talk about Martin Luther King using this. I talk about Winston Churchill using this. Right. I talk about everyday entrepreneurs and executives using this all the time to help them find a new gear, maybe move past some self-judgment and criticism. And most importantly, what if life was actually a little bit more playful? Because playfulness is a phenomenal activator for peak performance, which is one of the core sort of tenets of what I talk about in the book. So it's not about being inauthentic. Inauthentic would be doing this to deceive or trick other people. No. This is about you truly owning how you want to activate and be intentional with how you want to show up so that you truly do deliver the traits and qualities that are going to give you the best opportunity to win and have a great and successful career or experience.
Todd, let's move to a speed round because I want to get 3 quick ideas out of you. First, let's spend a minute talking about the value of target mapping. I found that especially relevant to my own career, kind of from where I've come and where I'm headed. Talk about the concept and why it's so valuable.
Yeah, so target mapping is just this concept that I've unpacked. Very successful people will naturally do, or they've learned it, which is end-in-mind thinking. Instead of starting from where you are and thinking about all the steps that you need to take in order to get to where you want to go, you start at the very end and you go, okay, well, this is because most people have a tough time clarifying what it is that they actually want. Once you have that clarified and you know where you're going towards or the result you're trying to create, then you start to pull the thread back and you say, well, what's the step that would happen before that? And then before that, what would have happened, or what do I need to do there? And now you're back to where you're starting. And it delivers just a high level of clarity for people. And once someone's clear, they develop confidence, or they develop momentum, and momentum begets confidence, and confidence gives you certainty. And when you've got someone who's very certain, you've got a dangerous athlete that's in competition, you've got a powerful leader because they can communicate differently. So target mapping is this idea of end in mind and then bringing it back towards where you are right now.
Do you find that most of the Olympic athletes you coach have that inherently within them? You help to pull it out, you teach them that concept? I'm guessing most people that become Olympic athletes had that sight set for decades.
No. It's actually, I think probably one of the most common misconceptions amongst even pro athletes is people think that, that athlete must have wanted to be a pro athlete, or they always wanted to play in the NHL or NFL. It's the exact opposite is actually the truth. I would say and from my experience, 70+% of them never even had the goal of playing pro athletics. They got lost in the process. Now, to your earlier statement, there's some that kind of came by target mapping naturally. Some of them we teach it or learn it, or some of them learned it, throughout, because they found that, okay, well, you want to know, how do you finish the race when you're coming down the downhill, and then how are you in? That's the best strategy. Same thing in golf. What's the strategy for how you're going to play the hole from the moment that ball falls into the cup, and then you work your way back with the shots and where you want to target place them.
Todd, build on that idea of target mapping to the next concept you teach, where I found just as valuable, around this idea of moments of impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when we're trying to unpack maybe areas that using an alter ego or a secret identity could be really beneficial for us, on a specific domain or role that we're operating in, we're looking for kind of moments of impact. So where are the moments in that role? So let's say it's a salesperson where you're not happy or you're frustrated with your performance. Is it a moment of impact kind of comes in a few different qualities? One, it's a decision point, or it's a choice that's about to be made. So it could be, you're trying to change your diet, and you consistently always go for the cheeseburger and fries on the menu instead of the salad and grilled chicken. Well, even simply asking yourself and getting Wonder Woman or Thor or someone else, how would they order on the menu? That's an example of just activating the idea of an alter ego, and now all of a sudden your decision changes. So decisions and choices are a moment of impact. People, anytime you're interacting with other people, that's an example of moments of impact, because some people, they can present really well when they're around their peers. The moment someone walks in that they think has a different level of social authority, now they drop down the rung on the ladder,
Right.
and they're no longer a dynamic performer or presenter. So those are kinds of the ideas of moments of impact that you can find, and then start to change the result.
Todd, would you go so far as to say a defining differentiator between superstar athletes and performers and business leaders and those who are perhaps mediocre is just the collective difference in their moment-to-moment decisions?
That would be a massive hallmark between them. They do a fantastic job of creating systems that allow them to get out of their own way and truly create a result that's going to propel them towards where they're ultimately trying to go.
Can you give us some examples of some of those systems, like something we can relate to?
Well, a system is, okay, I've got an executive friend here in New York City that always struggled with his health and fitness. So I asked him one day and said, what if you were no longer the CEO of your health and fitness? Because he's a CEO. So he understands the concept. He's like, what do you mean no longer the CEO? I'm like, what if you no longer made any more decisions around what foods you ate and what activities you did in order to activate a different level of fitness? And he's like, that's an interesting idea. So I said, what if you hired someone? Because he had the means necessary. What if you hired someone to do that? And so he does. He's got a health coach who makes all of his food decisions, has all of his food prepped for him, and literally picks him up and takes him kicking and screaming in the very beginning to all of his classes. So it's like, but it's the idea that, no, you're no longer responsible for your body. This person is. So to pull this back to make it relatable to other people. So I've done some fitness competitions, when I was in my late 20s and early 30s. And my best friend, Mike, we would do them together. And when we would go out together and we would be sitting down to eat, I would order food for him and he would order food for me. And it gets back to this idea that we as human beings, we'll do more for other people because we want, especially if you've got good friends or family or whatever, we want more for them than sometimes we want for ourselves. It's just this funny little human condition that we've got. So I want Mike to be successful. So I'm going to order salad and chicken, despite he might be craving something else, and he's going to do the exact same thing for me. I've just offloaded powerful decision-making that's going to lead to better choices to someone and something else that cares for me.
Todd, final minute. Let's talk about this concept. Chapter 6 in your book called The Hidden Forces of Enemy. I guess we all have them. Talk about that concept and what can we do to be aware of them, resist them, conquer them, move through them? Yeah,
well, first for context, I talk about in the book, that we live in a world of duality, up, down, inside out, dark, light. And what's really useful is the whole idea of an alter ego comes from Cicero. He coined it in 44 BC, which means the other I or trusted friend. And so what an alter ego is doing is it's being a powerful ally between the 6 inches of your own ears to help you, take different actions. And so if there is this hero that lives within, we might be battling against an enemy. And I talk about how the enemy within uses sort of hidden forces. The most common or the most prevalent hidden forces are things like imposter syndrome, you downplaying, any of the achievements that you've had to like luck or right place, right time, or, oh, anyone could have done that. Or it would be, what if people find me out, and I'm not as successful as they perceive that I am. That's imposter syndrome speaking. That's the enemy in your ear to try to keep you safe and in a comfort zone. Another one is, personal trauma, just like, I had gone through, some people have had some pretty tough things that happen to them. And so it questions their self-worth, or you question your self-worth, or it just eats away at you emotionally. And then the third one are tribal narratives. And these are the ones that people don't see as much. But they're things like, well, my family has never been an entrepreneur, so why would I be an entrepreneur? So we've attached and chunked our identity, our own personal identity, up to a group of people or another tribe that might be stopping us and not helping us, or no one from my religion could do that, or no one from my area has ever gone on to be a pro athlete or a business owner or an executive. And so those are three of the most sinister of the hidden forces that the enemy likes to use. And then the power of an alter ego is you can talk back to that enemy, and it's not about creating sort of multiple personality disorder for people. It's about having a powerful conversation where it's like, hey, listen, I see what you're doing. I am far more than that. And by the way, my good buddy here, Thor or Wonder Woman or Oprah Winfrey, because inspiration of alter egos can come from many, many forms. Kobe Bryant used a black mamba. Beyonce created Sasha Fierce. I had Super Richard, which was a composite of Superman and Joseph Campbell. But so that enemy, it does live within, and it kind of pulls us into the shadow to keep us safe and in a comfort zone. But any of the people who want to achieve things knows that that's not going to serve you going forward.
Captivating conversation today with Todd Herman, author of the book, The Alter Ego Effect. Visit alteregoeffect.com to learn more about his 90-day year plan. Todd, thank you so much for joining us, giving us lots to think about. Appreciate it.
Thank you.